Okay, sociologists, we continue our journey of learning about ethnicity, and this stuff comes from pages 94 and 95, although it's mostly just 95. Our learning goals for today are: I want you to know about Australia's multiculturalism, and I want you to be able to interpret task words. So in the exam and in the SACs that we do, there are various task words, and you need to know what those task words mean to be able to correctly answer the question. Otherwise, you'll answer a different question and waste time and not get the most amazing marks ever. Right, let's get into it. So, Australia's multicultural policy since 2007. Now, in our last lesson, we looked at the 4 principles that that policy was based on. So, 2/3 of Australians are born in Australia. The next 3 biggest places: UK, there's 3.9%, New Zealand and China both have 2.2%. Now, if you remember back to like lesson 2 of this topic, we looked at that awesome bar chart that moved throughout time, and it showed how UK has always been the #1 source for immigrants to Australia, but it's not as much more than other places as it used to be. And we're seeing a lot more people come from Asia. Okay, but here's an interesting fact. There's more people born in the UK in Australia than Indigenous Australians. Indigenous Australians, roughly, at the latest census, were about 3.3% of the population. Shocking fact. Right. So why are these statistics gathered? They help the government plan how to assist migrants from different areas. So if they find out that 2.2% of people come from China, then they might go, okay, well, we need some Chinese language material in our government documents, and we might want to reach out to the Chinese community to help them find work or help them learn the English language or whatever. An interesting fact, as I've possibly mentioned, as I'm from there, is that the immigrant group with the highest crime rate and the lowest educational attainment are New Zealanders. But nobody seems to have a tantrum about them because we're white. Who knows? Okay, so Australia has had waves of migration, yeah? So they've had and we watched a behind the news video last time about that. So, you know, a wave of migrants and then another wave of migrants, and then, oh look, there's someone surfing on the... No, it didn't happen. So, for example, why might there be waves of migration? So, war. So, after the Vietnam War, lots of Vietnamese people came to Australia, known as the Vietnamese boat people. Quite a few Vietnamese people in Australia came over to Australia after the Vietnam War. Famine. So, if there's a famine in your home country, for example, the various famines that have taken place over the last 40, 50 years, you know, if you know you're going to die of starvation in your home country, then you're sure as heck going to try and migrate to a country that's got lots of food, like Australia. Also natural disaster, so there's quite often natural disasters in Indonesia. Even, for example, more recently, I know of quite a few people from Christchurch in New Zealand who have moved to Australia permanently because there's just earthquakes there all the time, and you know, their house got knocked down and then they bought another one and then that house also got damaged in the earthquake. So yeah, Australia, I was going to say Australia doesn't have a lot of natural disasters. However, now that we get bushfires and droughts, that's not necessarily true. Anyway, and the last one, and this is really common, political upheaval from countries like Syria, where there's a civil war going on, and Iran, where there's a lot of where there's an authoritarian regime there. So a lot of people might move from Syria, Iran, Palestine to Australia, where you could say that it's a bit more politically stable. Now, we did look at this last time, but I just wanted to go back to this. This is the Multicultural Policy document from the Australian government. It was written when Malcolm Turnbull was the Prime Minister. And I might just read this out, yeah? So this is, you know, this is symbolic. Remember how we talk about the difference between practical and symbolic? This is symbolic multiculturalism. This is Malcolm Turnbull making a statement about multiculturalism, yeah? Australia is the most successful multicultural society in the world. I know for a fact that quite a few other countries say the same thing. So that there is opinion. Yep. The USA thinks it's the most successful multicultural society in the world. I think New Zealand does as well. Anyway, we're as old as our first Australians, the oldest continuing human culture on Earth, who have cared for this country for more than 50,000 years. I think the most recent archaeological evidence suggests it's closer to 80,000. Anyway, and we are as young as the baby in the arms of her migrant mother, who could have come from any nation, any faith, any race in the world. Australia is an immigration nation. Almost half our current population was either born overseas or has got at least one parent born overseas. And we come from every culture, every race, every faith, every nation. We're not defined by race, religion, or culture, but by shared values of freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and equality of opportunity, a fair go. Now, it's interesting, this idea that these are Australian values. Most democratic societies in the world have these exact same values, but you've got to bear in mind, this is the Prime Minister, and Prime Ministers try to create national unity by making statements like this. Yeah, it's in the government's interest if everybody has the same belief in these Australian values. That's just my opinion. Right, the glue that holds us together is mutual respect, a deep recognition that each of us is entitled to the same respect, same dignity, and the same opportunities. And national security, a resolute determination to defend our nation, our people, and our values, is the foundation on which our freedoms have been built and maintained. At a time of growing global tensions and rising uncertainty, Australia remains a steadfast example of a harmonious, egalitarian, and enterprising nation embracing its diversity. Multicultural Australia, united, strong and successful, renews and reaffirms the government's commitment to a multicultural Australia in which racism and discrimination have no place. The end. That's a nicely worded statement. Thanks, Malcolm. Right, just a quick word about generations. Yeah, this is the last note that you need to take for today. So migrants can be classified by generations. So first generation migrants are those born overseas but migrated here. I am a first generation migrant, born in New Zealand but migrated here about 20 years ago. Second generation, that's one parent born overseas. So my two children are second generation migrants. I am going to apply for them to get New Zealand citizenship by descent, which will mean they will have two citizenships. And third generation, that's one grandparent born overseas. If my kids ever have kids and I become a grandparent, my grandchildren will be third generation migrants. Right, so here's an interesting graph from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. This is showing the increase in population. Now, have a look at the blue line first, natural increase. So how many babies are being born in Australia? Not many, yeah? If it wasn't for migration, Australia's population would in fact be going down. The red line is generated by adding the blue and the green together, yeah? And because the blue line natural increase is about the same, it appears that the red and green line are going up and down in sync, which they pretty much are, yeah. So the total population growth is mostly affected by migration. Yes, this is possibly me being opinionated, but migration has had huge benefits for Australia, economically and culturally and otherwise. Right, the activity today is to do with task words. Really important that you understand what task words are asking. So when you get asked a question, you answer that question, not some other question that you come up with in your head. Remember, as I've said many times before, it's a really common psychological thing, is that when you get a difficult question, you replace that question in your head with a simpler question. So if it says, evaluate the Australia's multicultural policy, when people don't entirely understand what that means and maybe don't have enough knowledge to evaluate the multicultural policy, they might just go, write down everything you know about the multicultural policy, which is not the original question being asked. Okay. So, now I don't want you to answer these questions. On the next slide, you're going to see a series of questions. I just want you to write 1 or 2 sentences for each one explaining how such a question should be answered. So I want you to interpret the task word. We've previously looked at the task words, and I think they might be on my OneNote or whatever, but if you can't remember, if you just go to that site there, I've pasted in an explanation about what all of the most common task words mean. Right, here are the questions. I want you to write 1 or 2 sentences explaining how that question should be answered. I don't want you to actually answer it, yeah? I want you just to demonstrate that you understand what the task word is. First one, evaluate the success of Australia's multicultural policy. So what I'm asking you there is explain, to say what an evaluation is. Compare culture, ethnicity, and race. In this one, you got to say what you think a comparison is. 3, describe a migrant group that experiences othering in Australian society. So what is a description? And 4, explain how ethnic groups differ. So there you go. The 4 task words there are evaluate, compare, describe, and explain. 2 or 3 sentences telling me what each of those questions, how you would answer them. Right, our video for today is an Australian politician talking about multiculturalism in Parliament. It's fairly interesting, goes for about 5 minutes.
And I call the Honourable Member for Chifley.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. There are often occasions I can't believe I'm here, and there are probably instances in the way that I carry on. There's probably some of you on that side and even on my side that probably agree with that statement.
Yeah, well, that's fair. So far, so good.
Probably rushed a bit too quick to agree to that, but I'll put that aside. And the reason why it's hard for me to believe I'm here is because my parents were a product of poverty. I visited my mum's place in rural Bosnia, and a house that she grew up in that's probably no bigger than this area. And there were 8 people crammed into that house, and my dad's place wasn't much different. In fact, I took my dad back to Bosnia for his 60th birthday, and he showed me this beautiful bit of land. And he said this was ours until my dad gambled it away. And they made it here in the late 60s. And Australia opens its doors to allow us to have the chance to be here. My old man got to work on the Snowy Mountains scheme. Dad worked with his hands. Mum worked at home to make sure that we had a family that was able to take advantage of all the great things in this country. And I mention this to you because, like many kids of migrants, I carry around a debt of gratitude to this country that we were able to achieve. I got to go to university. I could count on one hand the folks in my family from my parents' generation that got to do that. And Australia gave me the chance to do that here. And I now get to serve in this place. Regardless of my faith, the commitment to my community is the thing that I'm judged on, which I'm very grateful for. And as much as we focus, and I've learned in this place, that one of the things is you can always make yourself taller by standing on the back of someone else. And as much as weapons wound, so do words. But actions mean more. Actions mean more, the way that they bind us together. There are a few improbable things in this place. One of them that's remarked on from time to time is my friendship with the member for Kooyong. 2 of us, probably the biggest dags in Parliament. I don't know if that's parliamentary, but we are. There we are, joined at the unhip. From different parties, from different parts of the country, different faiths. But actions matter more in terms of being able to find common ground. And in my contribution today, we can focus on the people that are trying to divide us, focus more on the things that bring us together as a country. This is a moment that is supposed to do just that. I remember on my election here, when he used to be known as the member for Wentworth and now is remarked as the Prime Minister, calling me to congratulate me on my election, which I've never forgotten. We all in this place can recognise moments where we've taken a little bit of a step as a nation together. The things that bring us together matter more. The things that can allow us to be a better country are things that are worth celebrating. That's why I focus on these things today, not to focus on the things that divide us and that have caused great anger and annoyance, those that have sought to drive division or fuel fear, but to recognise that this is a moment that we will be judged on both sides, not so much in terms of my words, but the actions of a Prime Minister or of a leader of an opposition in bringing the country together. And reminding us that we've all got an obligation to make the place a better place. And I'll end on this observation. You know, people ask me, because of my Muslim faith, do I have a problem with the Lord's Prayer at the start of Parliament? No, I don't. When you hear God's words, you hear God's words. They are good words. And in particular, and forgive us for our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. It's not an exhortation for the moment. It's a reminder for us to live a better life that is not mired in the negative, but in something that's better. And this is the moment that we can build on. There are a lot of people in different parts of the world that want to make their country great again. We've already got a great country. We can make it better. And we can make it better by working together and not focusing on the division. And not focusing as well, if I can make this remark, on ignoring words that are used in a debate that have caused in times past great pain to people. When you use those two words about final solution, when I spend time with my great friends from the Jewish community and I know the pain that they've gone through and that they've felt, you don't want that on anyone else, and you certainly don't want to remind people of the pain that they've been through. So we're going to use this as a moment to recognise the great things about our country, but call out the times where we've made those missteps and say we can do better.
Yeah.
The question.
Right, now when I was looking up multiculturalism on YouTube, there's quite a few people who have made videos who are against multiculturalism. This is not such a video, but it kind of tries to explain why multiculturalism isn't seen so well in a lot of European countries.
In many European countries, multiculturalism has become a dirty word. Whether we think of the Chancellor in Germany, who called multiculturalism a failure, the former President of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, David Cameron in the United Kingdom, various politicians across the continent who have all questioned multiculturalism. Part of this comes from the fact that, again, for many Europeans, multiculturalism means parallel societies that don't interact. And that's not the Canadian vision. What is also really interesting about differences and similarities between Canada and Europe is that on the ground, in many European cities, there are actually policies of multiculturalism, because multiculturalism means recognition and accommodation of difference. And if we go to a city like Berlin, or if we go to a city like Amsterdam, Paris, London, there's all kinds of accommodations being made in schools, in hospitals, and in the interactions people have on the streets. But what is quite different is, in the Canadian context, the very highest thought leaders talk about multiculturalism in a positive way. And so that sets a tone for society and for political discourse that is quite different in the European context. In terms of thinking how things might change if we look forward, if we wanted to reimagine societies, if we believe that immigrants in Europe are not going to disappear tomorrow and that their children are going to be born and grow up in Europe, then we have to figure out, how do we reimagine European societies in a way that are more inclusive? One way of doing this is to think about educational curricula. A real transformation in Canada was the way that history and social studies were taught. If you look at older textbooks, there is one authoritative voice that tells a homogeneous story of the country. If you look at textbooks today, often they'll have multiple voices that provide different perspectives on history. They'll focus on the contributions, social, scientific, political, of people of different backgrounds and faiths. And so it's a celebration of the nation in the accomplishments of various people. We can imagine this already happening in European countries, but probably it needs to be ramped up to the next level if we were to think about what we would do in the future in terms of promoting multiculturalism. There are debates among academics as to whether pluralism policy or multiculturalism might hurt the economic integration of immigrants. I don't think that there's strong evidence, one way or another, to show that multiculturalism has any effect on economic integration. I think that labor market policy and educational systems are much more important. But ultimately, whether you want to think through multiculturalism and pluralism policy, part of that choice is a moral choice. If immigrants are here to stay, and we believe that they have a legitimate right to stay in the country, then we want to think about how we can include them. And one way of including them is through full membership, citizenship, or even just social inclusion. And I think here, the research is very clear that multiculturalism and pluralism policy helps to make that inclusion possible.
Okay, the reflection activity for today is you're going to do a sense poem using the concept multiculturalism, yeah, cultural diversity in Australia. I want you to complete this. I see. What do you see when you imagine multiculturalism? I hear. What do you hear when you imagine multiculturalism? I feel. What do you feel? Not like emotions. Oh, you can do emotions if you want, but that usually means touch. I think emotions works better in this instance. What do you smell when you smell multiculturalism? And what do you taste when you taste multiculturalism? Right. Homework. This is a good one. It involves no writing, so get excited. I want you to ask your parents about where they are from, or where their grandparents are from, or their parents. So basically I want you to have a conversation with your parents or someone in your extended family where they tell you their migration story. There will be someone in your extended family who's been a migrant, and I want you to find out about why they left. How is it different here? Is it better or worse? Do they think that Australia is a successful multicultural country? All that kind of good stuff. Bonus homework for the keen beans. I want you to read page 95 of the textbook. That's where all this material came from. I want you to watch this video about Australian demography. Now, I'm not vouching for this guy's political stance, and with all YouTube videos, the comments are usually quite disgusting, so don't get into that. Talks about Australian demography. Have a look at it. bit.ly/Oz demography. Thank you very much for your attendance. Keep it real.